Greetings, my dear viewers. Welcome back to Ravenloft, the horror setting of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We return once again to Von Richten's guide to this series of prisons that can be found in the bowels of the Shadowfell. These prisons are run by foul dark lords, the main prisoners of the dark powers. In this video, we'll be going over 22 additional domains that can be found near the end of this horrifying adventure supplement. We have a total of 6 pages to cover. That's right. Only 6 pages for 22 domains of dread, 22 prisons, and 6 pages. Some may say that this is not a lot of information, and while that is true for a couple of these entries, that is only because it is poorly written. At least the summaries are. I've got to say, what is written, though, does give some intrigue, some hints of inspiration. There's actually a YouTuber that I've seen who covers each of the domains and makes an adventure out of them. Not canonical to the main source, mind you, in some cases, but they are still very interesting, and if I can remember to do so, I will link that channel in the description. The name of the YouTuber in question is PhD&D. I think he has a PhD in the literary arts, but in either case, it's still quite amusing and an enjoyable watch. But today we will be going over each of the domains of dread and try to figure out what these Dark Lords are all about. While the older editions can give us a few answers to how these Dark Lords act and why, some cases the domain is too new to have any information beyond what we know based off of these few paragraphs. And the first one we will be tackling today is a favorite among the Dungeons & Dragons YouTube community, Sire 1313, also known as the Morning Rail, with its Dark Lord, the Last Passenger. The hallmarks of this domain are stated to be escape from disaster and a lightning rail. Lightning rails, if you do not know, are from the Eberron campaign. Similarly, the name of this domain, the Morning Rail, is named after not only the lightning rail, but a specific lightning rail escaping a very specific disaster that occurred in Eberron's history, the Morning. Eyewitness accounts say that the Morning was a flash of light that decimated the entire nation of Sire, while others claim that it's a rolling mist that originated from the capital of Metrol, which Keith Baker, the mind behind the Eberron Rising from the Last War, did release a supplement for the capital of Metrol in Dread Metrol, its very own domain. But with Sire 1313, it is definitely different. Much like the Carnival of Fear, Sire 1313 is a mobile domain, with the Dark Lord being the last passenger, and the reason why the Morning Rail failed to escape the impending disaster. With the genres of disaster, horror, and ghost story, it's quite clear as to why this is going to be a horrifying tale. Now, before we get into the last passenger, who kicked off hundreds of passengers from Sire 1313 so that he himself can board with his luggage, we need to talk about the lightning rail itself and exactly what it means for hundreds of passengers to be kicked off, with hundreds still aboard an escaping lightning rail. Like I said, according to Sire 1313's entry, the VIP had forced hundreds of passengers from the passenger carriages to admit and maintain the secrecy of this final passenger and their retinue. When the lightning rail did finally depart, it was much too late. The disaster of the morning overtook the train and its hundreds of escapees. But what does that mean? Hundreds were first forced off, but hundreds still remained on Sire 1313. Well, let's go ahead and analyze the lightning rail, the mode of transportation of Eberron. According to Eberron Rising from the Last War, a lightning rail consists of 10 carts, without putting any obvious strain on the air elemental that is trapped inside of it. You have your 2 crew carts, one for going forward and the other one for your return. Then you also have your cargo carts. Gotta be able to have your luggage stored neatly. Your 4 passenger cars, which could be many different types. We have the galley, we have this one that I had just encircled, which is the standard car, and you also have the sleeper car and first class car. So there could be any combination of cars, including this one at the far top right, which is known as a steering car. And then you also have 2 dining cars. But how many passengers are able to board? Well, I would assume that first off, since this is an escape car, to decrease the number of crew cars to 1, and then switch out the standard car for the steering car and increase it to 5. At least as a base form. I would also say that the dining cars aren't necessary, but I'm not entirely sure. We don't know how long of a destination each of these escape trains had. We don't know their journey. So we'll just keep the dining cars. But we still need to calculate the number of passengers. How many can be on the train in the hundreds and still have hundreds of passengers kicked off? Using the steerage car that we had just mentioned earlier, and the rules for the swarm mechanic that I had covered in the Under Siege video, we're going to go off of a swarm that we actually do have, the skeletal swarm, which is a large swarm of medium-sized creatures. So with that in mind, and by the logic that we used in Under Siege, a swarm is going to have roughly 7 to 8 creatures. We'll say for the purposes of this that we have about 8 medium creatures in one large swarm. This will definitely vary because we do have children also escaping this crisis. So it could even be that there are a couple of smaller creatures being children in this swarm. With that being said, a steerage car can hold roughly 10 to 20 swarms, depending on how packed we want these swarms to be. After all, a swarm can occupy the same space as another creature, and vice versa. So, logically speaking, a swarm can occupy the space of another swarm, though probably not as compact as we would like to think. So for this estimation of a minimum of 10 swarms in one steerage cart, we have 70 passengers per cart, and a maximum of 160 passengers, which does seem unlikely. So we'll go ahead and say that we're dealing with 70 passengers per train car. Probably at the higher end, maybe 100. So this would roughly translate to a horrific number. Considering that the term hundreds by dictionary definition is about 300 passengers, that would mean that this sorry excuse for a human being that this VIP is forced at least 300 passengers off. This is roughly at a maximum, going by the 70 passengers per steerage cart. 4 steerage carts. Rough estimate. That is most of the passengers that we calculated. So we would definitely need to get rid of those lounge carts that we had talked about and add 2 more steerage carts. This passenger, the VIP, kicked off hundreds, with hundreds still aboard. But unfortunately, because of this man's greed and selfishness, the morning rail was unable to escape its oncoming disaster, and all the passengers unknowingly died in the morning. When the morning had took the VIP and the morning rail, they continue through the domains of dread, wanting to escape the morning, but they never will, as they had already been claimed by death. The VIP is going to be using the ghost stat block with a CR of 4. Obvious goal is escaping the morning that just killed him and his fellow passengers. Because of the situation of the morning, I would suspect that the Sorrow Sworn are either hitchhiking on top of the train or are in hot pursuit and are trying to board. So it would make sense for your party to want to stop the Sorrow Sworn at any cost. But once they figure out that all the passengers are ghosts, well, then they most likely figured out that they're on another domain of dread. And we'll need to find the VIP and have him stop the train. Which isn't going to happen, as Dark Lords will never learn their lesson and will deny the truth of the matter. Though I would say that for a brief moment, your VIP might realize their fate and decide to tell the captain to return to Metro, where they will accept their fate. Only, of course, for the train to boot back up and speed off once again, thinking that it could escape the morning. Because you know that's how the domains of dread work. But that will lead the players to take a trip through the capital of Saya, Metro. Now, with that sadness out of the way, let's move on to our next domain of dread. Forlorn, with the Dark Lord of Tristan Oblonk. Tristan Oblonk was born amid tragedy, the son of a vampire father and a human noble. This makes him a Dompier, like we have stated in the past, when we have similar characters. His parents were murdered by fearful villagers, leaving Tristan to be adopted by local druids. But during his teenage years, Tristan's Dompier nature revealed itself. When the druids discovered the youth's hunger for blood, they cast him out. But Tristan grew enraged and slaughtered the druids, draining them all. The sacred waters of the druids' rituals had infused their blood, though, making it poison to the half-vampire. Tristan died with his adoptive family, but as the mist closed in around their sacred stone circle, he rose as a ghost. Unexpectedly, with the dawn, Tristan's Dompier body was restored. Now Tristan lives by day, a perpetually young, charming, invention-obsessed Dompier dwelling in Castle Tristanora, the smoking fortress his goblin servants built over the druid circle of his one-time family. At night, though, the young Dompier dies a painful death. In his spectral form, he seeks to scour all that is green and vibrant from his land. This sort of gives me ideas of Tristan being an artificer. Something to definitely consider when making your own Tristan. Genres, of course, being gothic horror with hallmarks of life and death and strange invention, which doesn't really give much info about it, and neither does the previous version of Forlorn, which just makes Tristan a full-blown vampire, not a Dompier. For my version of Tristan, he will be a CR5 threat. By day, he will use the stat block of the vampire spawn, much like I have stated in the Dompier video so long ago. Dompier and vampire spawn are very similar in themes, and technically are the same thing. But by night, he will die and rise again as a wraith, seeking to destroy everything that is beautiful in this domain. And it makes the most sense that with this hatred for anything, quote, green and vibrant, not the stat block for Tristan should have access to the Blight spell. I would say 3 times per day. That way he can find any 3 patches of green that are probably near his castle, destroy them, and be done with it for the night. Of course, since this is his punishment to continually find anything green, he is still going to find more and more green in the area. And this would actually make for an interesting interaction with the party's druid, due to the bad blood that he had with his adoptive family. Definitely something to think about when you are playing as Tristan Oplanc. Castria. This is definitely a weird domain of dread. The Dark Lord Marquis Stizan de Polano, a popular among his noble peers, but crave immortality. A mysterious artist offered him eternity by painting de Polano's portrait upon a magical canvas. But the artist didn't mention that the painting would strip de Polano of his love of life and natural charm. The Marquis has discovered a reprieve from his now-dulled existence, however. Once every season, when he shows the painting to an audience, it consumes their souls and refreshes his thrill for life. De Polano's artistic predations captured the attention of the Dark Powers, which drew his lands into the mists. Now, Castria is a fertile land that, like its lord, lacks an essential vim, except for once a season, when vigor fleetingly returns. I would say that the genres of gothic horror and occult detective stories would best fit this domain, and its very weird Dark Lord hallmarks being the cursed art and a dour population, which is why the occult detective stories is one of the genres. You've got to figure out what exactly is going on. And speaking of our Marquis, he is a revitalized version of his older self, which is slightly weirder. But this newer version, much like the older version, still plays off of the inspiration of someone like Dorian Gray, who also has immortality because of a painting. However, unlike our Marquis, Dorian Gray is unable to look upon the painting himself, as if he does, he will age rapidly, while the painting regresses back to its original state. For Castiria's Dark Lord, I would say that Marquis obviously would be a noble, with a stat block of 1/8, with additions being something similar to Dorian Gray's powers, having him have rejuvenation, regeneration, and the relentless features. He will have his eternal life, even if it does seem like he does die every so often. He won't die until he messes up. Whether that be similar to Dorian Gray's fate upon looking upon his portrait, or maybe the portrait gets destroyed. Who's to say? Of course, Stezan's goal is to regain the ability to feel emotion, so perhaps he sends out invitations through the mists, inviting people to Castria to look upon the arts, where he will then sap out their souls to give him that fleeting feeling of emotion once again. Gehenna. This is definitely another weird Dark Lord, Yagno Petrovna, born of a Barovian family. Wait, a Barovian family? Barovia is another domain of dread. That is something that's probably going to come up a couple of times in these domains, is that they have older connections to some of the existing domains of dread. And the Dark Lord was once a part of that domain of dread, but upon doing something heinous like we see with Yagno, they create their own domains and become a prisoner in that regard. Yagno, unfortunately, decided that he was going to worship a deity that doesn't even exist. As a violent storm rose, he took shelter in a mysterious ruin. It was found wandering the hills, weeks later babbling about an amber idol and the god he discovered. Zakata, the provider and destroyer. His family sought to help them, but when they discovered Yagno secretly sacrificing people to his fictitious god, they chased him into the mists. When Yagno emerged, the domain of Gehenna sprawled before him. Now, just to note, Gehenna is not to be confused with an actual plane of existence within Dungeons & Dragons known as Gehenna. Now, if you're looking for an adventure in Gehenna, there is an older adventure known as Circle of Darkness, where Yagno is currently battling with his own inner turmoil. You see, after trying to bring his deity into Gehenna, he unfortunately summoned a Nelfishne known as Melistroy. Well, he didn't summon it. It was a wizard he hired to try to bring his deity to life. That's why he had some recognition, something to prove that he wasn't crazy. But, of course, Melistroy only seeks to take down the mad priest and take over the domain of dread. Now, Yagno was able to defeat the Nerfishne, but that didn't exactly help his doubts. He still wishes to worship his deity, but he is plagued by doubt that is ever growing, which is his punishment, and sooner or later, he might not believe in his deity anymore. And to that, it's kind of sad. We do see this often in real life when some individuals start to lose faith in their religion. It's a sad existence, but it does happen. Invidia. Gabriel Audier, the genre of ghost stories and occult detective stories with the hallmarks of bad parents and possessed children. That's a weird hallmark to talk about. Not to mention that Gabrielle thinks that her son, Mauricio, is destined for greatness. Not really sure where this comes from, as we're not given much information beyond that, other than the fact that she's wanting to summon spirits, angels, fiends, and worse, to make sure Malicio's path of glory is easily traversed. I think we need to look at the older editions and... Ooh. I see an old friend of ours has graced our presence. The gentleman caller is the one who fathered Malicio, Gabriella's son. And Gabriella herself is part of Vistani, so The collar's definitely doing good for himself and getting what he wants. And it looks like Malashio's goal, his destiny, is to destroy the Vistani. That's pretty odd. I would say Malashio, being the son of an incubus, will have the stat block of a Cambion. No further changes beyond that from what I can tell, though I'm sure there are some. Gabrielle herself, our Dark Lord, or rather Dark Lady, is going to have to be an enchanter wizard. According to the older lore, she is able to cast enchantment spells by just gazing at you. So, for any additions to the Enchanter Wizard, I would say that meta magic options of the Careful spell, Subtle spell, and Quicken spell are going to be great additions and give us the flavor that we need for this Dark Lady. And her goal, of course, is to raise her son to fulfill his unknown destiny, which we can tell is going to be a problem down the line, much like with the gentleman caller himself. Keening. This is probably one of the more depressing domains of Dread, with the Dark Lord of Thracia being a banshee. Genres, of course, going for folk horror and the ghost story. According to the entry here, a forbidding land of kinging is dominated by Mount Lament, at whose base lives the village of Unwerton, where all the residents are deaf. This is no accident, for the locals purposely deafen themselves so they won't hear the shrinking of the banshee Tristessa, a mournful spirit who roams Mount Lament and whose wails carry through the night. In life, Trestia dwelled upon Mount Arak in Tempest, but she was exiled for crimes against her people. In death, she endlessly seeks to be reunited with the family slain by her misdeeds. What these misdeeds are, I do not know. It doesn't even seem to have any answers in the older version. But again, Trestia is going to be a Banshee, which is a CR4, which is definitely a well-balanced encounter, no matter who you ask, because, well, we're playing the Banshee as it should be. A mournful spirit that wants to reunite with their family. So if you can find the family and reunite them with Tristessa, then you might solve the problem. Next is Chlor. A void, a black hole in the center of this domain is called Chlor. 13 stars orbit this sun-like sphere, one winking out every hour. Each time one of the stars dies, one of the domain's ruined islands is drawn into Chlor and consumed by flames. With it, each other island retches ahead and holds 1 hour closer to its soup. Blah, blah, blah. This is a boring domain. Just, what's the point? There's no goal here. Wait a second. A hidden Dark Lord, the obsessed clockmaker named Chlor. Who in the world is Chlor? Dark Lord of Chlor is going to give us the hallmarks of impending doom and surreal environment. This is because he is a powerful arcane researcher, walker of the plains, and a clockmaker. He created several magical items: the timepiece of Chlor, hourglass of Chlor, moondial of Chlor, and water clock of Chlor. Unfortunately, his obsession with clockwork devices proved to be his undoing. He was consumed by his inability to synchronize and control his heart like the rest of his clockwork creations. After crossing the planes of existence and making evil pacts, Claw crafted his timepiece and gained immortality of a sort. However, the timepiece required regular murder. Although he resisted at first, he eventually became corrupted and gave in. Eventually, his time ran out when he botched a murder in the timepiece to claim his life. Once again, going off with disaster horror, and of course, being that this is time-related, we're going to go with psychological horror. This will definitely be an interesting domain to play out, since you are given the 1 hour time limit for each island within this domain. This forces your players to actually act out the adventure, whatever that may be. Perhaps Clore tricks them into trying to find each of these magical artifacts and bring them back to him so that he can once again regain control over his powers over time, and whatever else these devices are able to do. For the stat block of the Dark Lord himself, it makes the most sense to go with the Warlock of the Great Old One, which is CR6. I would definitely recommend adding some Artificer features as well, since he did, in fact, create these clockwork artifacts. Of course, his goal is to regain control over himself and his clockwork inventions: the timepiece, the hourglass, the moon dial, and the water clock. Markovia. This was kind of just a disappointing domain, a disappointing Dark Lord, with him being sort of stupid. Dr. Fraskis Markov is a genius, but less so than yesterday. He made a special potion to give him even more intelligence, but after it wears off, he ends up becoming dull-witted and bestial in form. This is no better in the older version, where he was doing experiments on animals and people, making these animal-human hybrids, and he himself in turn gets turned into a gorilla with a human face. This just reminds me of a mad doctor from Full Metal Alchemist. It's kind of depressing because Markovia and Dr. Fantastic Markov pull inspiration from the island of Dr. Moreau, which, much like his creations, are reflected in the beast people, much like Markov. These half-human, half-animal hybrids do have the animalistic intentions, but also human intelligence, for a time, until they regress into a bestial nature. For this version of Markovia, I would definitely recommend using the mongrel folk, which have very similar characteristics to beast people. Even the jackalware would definitely make the most sense for these creatures. And I would definitely recommend taking inspiration from the Isle of Dr. Moreau for a Markovia campaign. So we're going to change things up a bit and actually take inspiration from Dr. Moreau for our Dr. Markov, with genres of course being in body horror, the hallmarks of depraved science, and human-animal hybrids. Such is the way of the beast people. For Dr. Markov, the stat block, of course, will be a biomancer, with the goal of creating the perfect human-animal hybrid that does not regress to an animalistic state. Why he wants to do this, I don't know. I would say use similar characteristics to a Semic scientist. Anywho, moving on. The Nightmare Lands. This one is definitely a weird one and has itself a paradox. And I'll explain more here in a minute. The Dark Lords are the Nightmare Court. In the older versions, we actually do have stat blocks for them. But, much like in the old version, they are the living nightmares of Caroline Dinwiddie, which is where our paradox first begins. Psychological horror, obviously, since we are talking about nightmares. The Nightmare Court consists of the Nightmare Man, Hypnos, Bologna, the Ghost Dancer, Morpheus, and sometimes two others, one known as the Rainbow Serpent and another one known as the Red-Headed Child. Older adventures do have stat blocks for these Dark Lords, but I did not want to go over those stat blocks in a conversion just yet, so I decided to just go with stat blocks we already have. For the Nightmare Man himself, who is most likely our big bad, we're going to go with the Karalak Karai. For Hypnos, we're going to go with a Fear. Malogna, who is a witch, will be an Evoker Wizard. The Ghost Dancer, of course, will be a ghost. And Morpheus will be a Hashalak Karai. We don't exactly know what the goals of these people are, but most likely has something to do with Dinwiddie. A NPC that you should probably use within the Nightmare Lands is Dr. Gregorian Ilhausen, who is the enemy of the Nightmare Court. They are rivals, arch nemesis, what have you. He is a psychologist within the asylum that has been pulled into the Nightmare Lands, and he wishes to escape after he defeats the Nightmare Court, along with his assistant/lover, Carolyn Dinwiddie. According to the entry of the Nightmare Court, Carolyn Dinwiddie is in a coma of sorts, and she refuses to wake up to face the terrors her dreams unleash upon innocents across the multiverse. So yeah, Carolyn created the court hates Gregorian Ilhausen hates the Nightmare Court, but is in love with Carolyn Dinwiddie, who also happens to be carrying Dr. Gregorian Ilhausen's child. This is a horror triangle, and I hate Niranjan. I kind of like this domain because it has a dragon in it as its main villain, taking from the original domain of Kalakiri, which is a domain we are familiar with once again. Niranjan is an island chain. The ashram of Niranjan was a vibrant nihara or monastery for ascetic scholars who practice Ramsana, a way of life whose central tenet advises non-attachment to the material world. Now, only one small reclusive group of these scholars remains, led by the elderly holy figure Niranjan. In truth, Niranjan is Sartak, a wicked bronze dragon who sent agents into the mist, bearing his philosophical writings. These works promise escape and peace to any who adopt their teachings and search the mist for their source. Anyone who comes to the ashram must divest themselves of worldly goods, which are added. The Sharthak's hidden hoard. The false Saru then helps his victim enter a blissful trance that causes their soul to slip away from their body over the course of days. Sarthak consumes this soul and replaces it with a shadow, leaving the victim's body under his control. And now you can probably see why our genres are dark fantasy and folk horror, with the hallmarks asceticism, brainwashing, and shadows. Since we are dealing with a Shadowfell entity, Sarthak is definitely a shadow dragon, which definitely increases our bronze dragon CR from a 15 up to... I didn't actually get to calculate this, just know that it's greater than 15. I would say probably an 18 at the absolute lowest. His goal, of course, is to create his horde, but what else is quite unclear. We don't even know why he's consuming souls. But we went with the Shadow Dragon because anybody a Shadow Dragon kills will rise as a shadow. Which is what he does. He puts shadows into the bodies of those he consumes. It's definitely an interesting adventure, and one I would wish was explored a little bit more. But it's all we got. Nova Vasa, the Dark Lord of Mir Haggard, or Malkan. The genre of dark fantasy, the hallmarks of nomadic riders and transformation. An unparalleled warrior, Maya Haggard united the nomadic tribes of the vast plains of Nova Vasa, but while respected as a soldier, Maya had a poor peacetime leader. When brutal games could no longer keep her interest, she incited hostilities between two of her vassal tribes, then led her own forces to crush them. Suddenly, she did this again and again. After Maya's greatest massacre, the mist enfolded all of Nova Vasa, splitting Maya's personality in two when they did. Now she rules her people with strict fairness, but when her bloodlust is piqued, she transforms into the raging knight called Malkan and sows discord across the plains. In the older versions, Malkan is actually the true Dark Lord here, while Maya is Malkan's torment, being a peacekeeper until she is able to transform into this ruthless knight who slays anyone she comes across. So for stat block, obviously, we are going with the Blackguard, which is a CR of 8. Nothing else is given on the information of Nova Vas or Maya Haggard in this form, but we do have some more information to go off of in older editions, which I would definitely recommend checking out. Oh dear. One of the first domains of dread that comes from the IRL world. The older versions of Odir actually stem from let's see, what was it again? I think it was French. Ah, yes, here we are. Single throw per Hamlet in the Hebed. The domain was based on a twisted version of traditional Italian children's fable Pinocchio. Indeed, Odir originated in Gothic Earth. The language used is Italian, so definitely have an Italian-speaking puppet walking around. Slasher horror is going to be our main theme here, definitely taking inspirations from Chucky, of all people, so definitely take a look at that. The toy maker Giuseppe had wished his family granted when his creation, a Mariette
Figlio came to life. A proud father, the toymaker, presented his son to all the other people of the village. Oh, there! Local children know Figlio, but their parents are skeptical, saying the marionette was nothing but a toy. Over time, this doubt enraged Figlio, and the marionette convinced the Sheppy to craft siblings for him. Then, when the time was right, the Sheppy's creations did away with all the adults in O'Dare. Claimed by the Mist, O'Dare is a village populated only by children and ruled by the marionette Figlio, who now calls himself Maligno. Of course, this is a strange twist on Pinocchio. So, we are definitely using the stat block of the marionette, but Maligno does not have the soul swap action. This is actually part of his torment, because he does want to become a real person. Because, well, that was why nobody liked him, because they thought he was just a toy. Again, this is one of those where the goal is unclear, but is somewhat clear if we're going off the basis that this is a Pinocchio horror version. We can also use inspirations from Chucky on this, wanting to try to find a way to put his soul into the body of another human. I believe Maligno's original plan was to become human by taking over one of the adults' bodies, but that ultimately failed. So perhaps when the adventuring party arrives, he'll try again on one of them. The Rider's Bridge. Another sort of disappointing domain. This one I found out to be even more disappointing because it was actually taking a step back, right to the original version of the Winding Road domain of Dread, which we don't have much information off of. All we know is that it got updated to the Endless Road, where the domain's Dark Lord was Eli von Hassen, who had wronged the Headless Rider. And I've got to say, a mutated centaur? Really? That's not the Headless Horseman. That's Nuklove. Anyway, nearly every domain knows of some version of the apparition called the Headless Rider. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Has a missing head, appears upon the prominent bridge, and it decapitates victims as it endlessly searches for its own head. We don't know the Rider's real torment. We don't know why he's here. That's why I kind of like the idea of the Endless Road more than the Rider's Bridge. That's where we actually have a Dark Lord in Eli von Hassen, who had wronged the Rider. And that's his torment. The Rider is trying to get him, even though he will not leave his estate. But I do like the idea of the Rider's Bridge connecting the different domains of Dread together. If you cross the bridge, you enter a new domain. So I would say using the Endless Bridge as a basis, this Endless Road as a base, you travel across one bridge to get to the Endless Road, but then have to find another bridge to cross, and hope that you're able to escape the Headless Horseman from finding its head in yours. Of course, the Headless Horseman itself is going to be using the stat block of the Dullahan, which is a CR10. I would definitely recommend giving the additions of the Cavalier Fighter and the Mounted Combatant feat. Again, this is one of those that we don't have a clear goal on. All we know is that the original version was a little bit better than this one. As Eli became a Dark Lord because he decided to frame a hero who had just saved his village from a monster. Guy's an idiot. But anyway, that is his curse. That is why he is trapped in the domains of dread on this endless road. If he ever leaves his mansion, he will be pursued by the Headless Rider. Siblos. Let's move away from that wreck of a domain of dread and move to something a little bit more amusing. Recibilos is a small music hall similar to those found in any decent-sized city. Its lord, Derodon, was once a king, one so thoroughly humorless that he forbade his subjects the privilege of laughter, upon pain of death. He is now cursed to entertain others, a task he utterly unqualified for. But the mist gave him a partner in a ventriloquist dummy that looked like Stradvan Zarevich, which is hilarious. The original version actually has this partner not as a ventriloquist dummy, but as a jester known as Puncheron, which I think would be perfect to give the name to the dummy that believes it's Strahd von Zarevich. This is another fan favorite of some YouTubers. I think it's hilarious. I think it should be this newer version, because the older version is a little weird, since it just kind of twists it a little bit to where it says Dorodon does not like laughter, so he will kill you if you laugh. But now he is being tormented by a law that requires you to laugh. It's an ironic punishment, but not as fulfilling as this new punishment, where he is now forced to be an entertainer, which seems a bit more fitting than being subjected to this laughing law. I don't know. It's a little weird. For King Durandon, I would obviously give him the noble stat block. He just wants some peace and quiet for once. He doesn't like it when people laugh, for whatever reason. Probably has one of those hearing disabilities where certain noises just bother him, and the one noise that bothers him the most is laughter. For a ventriloquist dummy, we're going to go with the name Puncheron because that is just hilarious. His goal is obviously to get to Barovia so he can take the throne from Strahd von Zarevich, because he thinks he's Strahd von Zarevich. I think it's just amusing. Nothing beyond that. This is just a funny little domain to sort of get away from the melancholy and the horror from the other domains of dread. Just a small break. Scanner. The Dark Lord of Limbons done just the hallmarks of reality manipulating theater. We have another weird one. It looks like my slide messed up here. Oh well. He is a playwright whose only fame came from comedies. When he tried to do some serious art, he was met with harsh criticism. So he decided to just make it tragedy, full of murder and bloodshed, intending to substitute the stage props with actual weapons to trick his actors into killing each other. But that also really just failed. He got booed from the audience, who denounced the bloody events performed before them as too gory. So, Lamont decided to burn down the theater. Cool. And apparently, in this new version, he still does this, burning down the theater after every performance. Joy. I would give him the Illusionist Wizard stat block and give him fire immunity because of this weirdness. His goal is to entertain the audience. I don't understand this one. This one could have just been written off. I mean, I guess it's funny, but it's not really worth it. I would have rather have more information on Morkovia than this. It just baffles me why this even exists. And now for some less confusion and more just maddening. I do not like this one. The Sea of Sorrows. Dark Lord Petra von Ries. I am just absolutely mad at the writing, the lazy writing of this domain. Why? Why did you do this? All they did was take the Nocturnal Sea and the Sea of Sorrows from older editions and smash them together into one domain of dread. Why? Why? This one really sets me off. If you've seen my community page, you know that this took me forever, and why this video is late, because of this. And another domain of dread will be coming upon next, and another one soon after, but more on that later. I really hate this. All they did was take Markovia, Gostia, and a few others out, and just smashed the Nocturnal Sea and the Sea of Sorrows together in one domain, and they gender flipped the original Dark Lord, who was already a knockoff version of someone from pop culture already. Barbossa! Just a gender-flipped Barbossa. Sometimes the gender flipping's alright, but at other times, when you already have bad writing, and you just tack on another lazy writing trope that only makes your domain even worse. So we're just going to go ahead and go over Petra von Ries. We're not going to cover the others in the Sea of Sorrows. For today, I will save them for another video, just to make sure I don't have a migraine from the lazy writing. Petra von Ries will have the stat block of the Deathlock Mastermind, since we are taking inspiration from the original Peter von Ries, who made a deal with anybody who can save his ship from the massive storm. And since the Dark Powers answered, he now is a Dark Lord of the Sea of Sorrows, who commands his ghostly ship. His only goal is to leave the Sea of Sorrows, to make it to his original destination, like was planned in the original version. Once again, taking some inspiration from a real-life version of Gothic Earth, hailing from the Netherlands. So there you go. That can give you some form of inspiration for this character that isn't just lazy writing. Shadowlands! Here we go again! Our next lazy written domain. Just smashing all three domains into one paragraph for no reason, only mentioning one of the Dark Lords as the main focus, while the other two Dark Lords are just a footnote at the very end of the paragraph. Why? What is the point of only making them a footnote? I mean, yes, this is a very nice Dark Lord. This is a very nice domain of dread. But the fact that you only left the other two Dark Lords as a footnote, and not as their own separate category, their own separate paragraph, is annoying. Ebon Bane is the Dark Lord of Shadowborn Manor, which can be found in the Shadowlands. It is categorized as a +1 Flaming Vorpal Longsword. So, we're going to use Flame Tongue and Vorpal Sword stats for the creation of this sword. Flying Sword, which is going to be a CR of 1/4, which will increase since we are increasing the damage output of the Vorpal Sword. On a critical hit, it'll deal an extra 6d8 points of damage since it is a Vorpal Sword. It's a flaming sword, so we are going to be doing some extra damage from the flames. And Ebon Bane is imprisoned in the sword. It's actually a demon of some kind. I don't exactly remember what. So it is a good idea to have this as a 2-part boss battle. Someone accidentally breaks the sword and releases the demon inside. Very interesting, though they could have just talked about Ebon Bane and not just left the other Dark Lords as a footnote if they wanted to even mention them. Sorang, Anton Mizroy. Here we have some relief from the lazy writing. They actually took some lazy writing from past editions and improved upon it and made it even better than before. Which, again, is a relief from these past two domains we've talked about. I actually like this Dark Lord and its domain. Ghost stories and slasher being our genres, it definitely gives me vibes of Dead by Daylight, which is extraordinary. It's a whole lot better than what we got originally from this domain, but this newer version is perfect for a campaign setting. It's the perfect adventure setting, and I absolutely love it. For Anton himself, since he died by drowning in the swamp, is going to be a drowned master. Since all he wants to do is capture more prisoners to torture, we're going to give him a pincer staff and a net as his primary weapons. And we're going to give him the Thrown Arms Master feat from Teldore Reborn. This will improve upon the net throws that we have, since they are pretty much garbage. The whole point is to try to get away from Anton, or to sneak around him and try to free any of the prisoners that he has brought into captivity in his prison, where he is the warden of, which is amazing. Definitely would love to run this as a miniature adventure. This would be exciting. Staunton Bluffs. The Dark Lord is Teresa Blythesmith. Hallmarks of endless warfare and repeating history. Let's see. Eerily faceless mercenary. Regiments sweep the countryside of the bluffs, burning villages and killing helpless residents. They push ever eastward towards Castle Stonecrest. Eric Cole and the Blizzmoth family. Teresa, spurred by jealousy for her brother Torrance, gave her family's foes the intelligence they needed to raid Staunton Bluffs. The attack was never supposed to go so far, but the duplicitous mercenaries stormed through the countryside to take Castle Stone Crest within a day. Teresa survives the attack, but when she survived the damage done and found her family dead by her own design, she threw herself from the bluffs. Now she haunts her own domain, where she repeatedly relives the day of her betrayal. Oh, come on! This is a psychological horror! Based on Groundhog Day of all things! Why? I hate these! Some people might like the concept of reliving the same day over and over again, but this is true psychological horror for me. I hate these movies. I hate when they come up. It is just lazy writing. Why do you have to have a domain of dread based off of this lazy concept? Teresa Blythemoth is a wraith. Her goal is to end the cycle and finally be at peace. This one does take some difference from the original. Taurus was the original betrayer of his family, and he's the one that decided to hang himself out of guilt and grief. But other than that, this is just torture for me to read. Move on. Oh, thank goodness. Tovag. Thank goodness, Tovag. The Dark Lord is Cos the Bloody-Handed. Hallmarks of undead military dictatorship. I don't think I need to introduce this guy. Cos the Bloody-Handed kind of introduces himself. He used to be the general of the Archlich Vecna's army. And one day his sword decided to whisper into Cos's ear, Hey, what if you were in charge? And Vecna just killed over. How does that sound? Why don't you be in charge instead of Vecna? So Cos did. He stopped the ritual that was supposed to make Vecna a god. Well, at least he tried to. This, of course, meant that he betrayed his deal with Vecna, and now the two are in constant warfare. Originally, Vecna had his own domain of dread, but that has since been retconned, I guess. Cos thinks that Vecna's domain lies just beyond his prison of Tovag, so he sends out a military of undead warriors out into the mists. Of course, they never return, so he continues to cycle through the citizens of his domain, making more warriors. He himself is going to be a vampire warrior with some features from the Oathbreaker Paladin. His goal, of course, is to find and kill Vecna and find the Sword of Cos. We do actually have a stat block for Vecna thanks to the Vecna Dausa, which is alright. I mean, it's nice that we have a stat block for him, but it's not the best in the world. The Vang Agency. Flamir Flintlock Vog, according to the entry of the Vog Agency, is expecting of the adventurers as they walk through the frosted glass doors that lead into this single-room domain. I think this is a hilarious domain, and definitely play off the trope where you have the monologue going through your players' heads. Just like the detective noir style that the Vogue Agency clearly draws inspiration from. Now, we don't really get much information, and the hallmark of memory loss is definitely a weird one, as well as the fact that Miss Vogue is a detective turned criminal. Where did this come from? What is going on? We do have some lazy writing here where it doesn't quite explain why these things are here. It's not as nutty as what we had just reprieved ourselves from in some of the previous domains, but it is still something I wish was expanded upon more. This is the one domain I wish we got more info on. Flamera herself, I would definitely use the Inquisitor of Mindfire as our stat block. We don't know what her goals are, other than that she's a detective, so she probably has similar goals to a detective in the film noir style. And since she's a flintlock, her nickname is Flintlock. I would give her a flintlock pistol. That's just good writing. Alright, let's go ahead and get rid of the rest of that. Let's talk about a bit of film noir. There are some character archetypes that we need to discuss and should help us create a adventure around the I want to say Vogue agency. I think it's a better pronunciation than vague. We do have that H going after the V. Anyway, you have, for the most part, this is the stereotype within film noir. You have your protagonist, the male detective, and the femme fatale, or fatal woman. Now, there are some instances where the roles are reversed. You have a female detective, and you also have the male counterpart, the femme fatale, known as the homme fatale, which actually has a different personality than the femme fatale, where the femme fatale, the danger is obvious. This is obviously a dangerous woman. You do not want to be associated with her. The homme fatale is different. Think... what was the example they gave? They gave a good example of an excellent homme fatale, but I would say that the male protagonist of 50 Shades of Grey, from what I hear, that guy is a homme fatale, straight to the core. He seems like a good person, a guy you want to get to know. But once you start to know him, he starts to drag you in to a world that you don't want to be a part of, and you start to lose yourself, and he takes you away from who you are. Another trope that is common in film noir is corrupt law enforcement, which brings us back to our entry of Miss Vogue being a detective turned criminal, and for some reason she has involvement in every case her agency investigates. That's strange. What is Flamira's backstory? What caused her to be here? I need answers. This is strange, and I want more info. This intrigues me. Zarisia, and once again we get to end our video with two domains smashed together in one. But the older version does the same thing. with Timur being underneath of Peridon. If in the sewers of this slowly decaying city, who has a doppelganger lurking the streets, our Dark Lord of Sodor, who happens to be unable to control his transformations anymore. But there was much more to that in the original version, where his torment was that he could not kill with his bare hands like he wanted to. Instead, his hands would heal those he touched. Which, for someone who wants to kill people gruesome fashion, it was definitely torture for this guy. Of course, since we are dealing with a doppelganger whose flesh runs like hot wax, we're going with body horror and slasher horror for our genres. We are dealing with serial murders and urban decay. I would say that Zarissa also has some ties with the Vogue Agency. This should probably be one of the first domains you come across in a campaign centered around the Vogue Agency, since they have similar settings. For the city of Peridon, our Dark Lord of Sodor has the stat block of a doppelganger, and we're going to give him the additions of the Mercy Monk's Hands of Healing, an at-will of the Dark Powers, use of True Resurrection, which is hilarious. We also give him a Hat of Disguise, since that's what he has in his original stat sheet, and Immutable Form, since you can't change him, but he sure can change himself. And he has the goal of acquiring an artifact known as the Fang of Nosferatu, which is what he is searching for in his original outing. And he wants to watch his victims die an agonizing death. And with that being said, that is the end of today's video. I do apologize for the late posting. I could not get the recordings right. Nothing sounded right when I was recording, but I think I finally got everything together. With that being said, this has been Drahon, and I hope you have a happy Halloween.